Meow! Huples cat. One of the great things about the internet and social media, and try and remember that we've only had really social media for about 10 years or so in the present form, maybe 15. You can argue that it's a huge mental and psychological experiment on the entire human population, and that we are very literally, by using tools, reprogramming our minds. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a whole bunch of ill-informed, very badly sourced videos on COVID-19 disease in Mink. And I think it's a good illustration of what we're faced with. A low level of information that's evolving in real time, that's not being transmitted effectively. It's being used by the media to sensationalize, because media in a large part of the world have to get advertising to actually pay for themselves. And people want to be sensationalized. They want media that's extreme. So one of the things is, what does this mean for you? So I don't have any research reports on this, but I do have some videos and I'm going to show them and clips of them. So the first one is Dr. Fauci.
Whenever you see something like that, you need to pay attention to it. You certainly can't just blow it off. You've got to look at it. You've got to take a look at what it means, what the mutation has to do with various aspects of the molecules that are responsible for binding of antibodies. We took a first look, the group here in our Vaccine Research Center who takes this very seriously, and says that when you look at the binding sites, you know, the spike protein has a receptor binding domain that binds to the ACE2 receptor on cells throughout the body. It does not appear at this point that that mutation that's been identified in the minks is going to have an impact on vaccines and the effect of vaccine-induced immune response. It might have an impact on certain of the monoclonal antibodies that are developed against the virus. We don't know that yet, but at first cut, it doesn't look like something that's going to be really a big problem for the vaccines that are currently being used to induce an immune response.
So as soon as people use words like maybe and could and we don't know, and they're all totally appropriate words to use for this right now, because we don't know, and we're trying to figure this out. People will fill up the gaps with their own imaginations. Now, I'm a prepper, so when you see a glass half full, you're an optimist, and when you see a glass half empty, you're a pessimist. When I see a glass, I see something that could easily break and shatter into pieces and cause huge damage to your hand. But that's how I'm coming at this. But I can't come at it from that angle. It's another data point, it's another concern. It's not unusual that coronaviruses can spread into mammals. They can spread into fish, I think, and also into snakes. Now, one quick interjection. There's a large number of products out there for veterinary use that say proof for coronaviruses. Yeah, they are for some. They're not proof for SARS-CoV-2. Just because it says coronavirus, there's lots of coronaviruses, so just bear that in mind. As yet, we have no effective treatment at all for coronavirus, none, other than probably vaccine and definitively Solumedrol in high IV doses for people who are ventilated. And that doesn't cure it, it maybe helps save some of them. So a lot was made of Denmark. Denmark first noticed SARS-CoV-2 virus in mink, and they definitively have had the mink catch it from human handlers on the mink farms in Denmark. They've also, they believe, had cases of human handlers catching SARS-CoV-2 from the mink on the mink farm. And one of the things is that there was a lot of information put out there. I'm not going to show you the dead mink bubbling out of the ground. I'm not even going there, I can't. I just think I just can't go there. So one of the things that is that they made this huge big splash about when the Danish government decided to kill all 15 million mink to prevent possible contamination of the majority of the healthy mink with SARS-CoV-2 and possible alteration of the virus and retransmission back to humans. That strikes me as a sensible move.
Fredriksen visited a mink farmer who lost his herd after government ordered to cull all 17 million minks in the country to curb the spread of coronavirus.
Vi har 2 generationer af rigtig dygtige minkavlere, far og søn, som på meget kort tid har fået knust deres livsværk. Og det har været følelsesladet for dem, og undskyld, det er det også for mig. Og som jeg lige sagde her til sidst til både Peter og Andreas, at når vi er på den anden side af det her, og forhåbentlig har fået lavet en ordentlig aftale om kompensation, så håber jeg, at de og alle andre minkavlere vil huske, at det var ikke på grund af dem, og ikke fordi, at de har været dårlige minkavlere. Tværtimod, så er det verdens bedste minkavl. Det foregår lige præcis her, hvor vi står, men det er på grund af coronaen. Og det håber jeg kan være et lille lys i mørket på et tidspunkt for danske minkavlere, at det er simpelthen ikke deres skyld, at det her erhverv skulle gå ned.
The order to cull the entire mink population came when authorities became aware of COVID-19 outbreaks at hundreds of farms. This included a new strain of the virus which was likely to compromise the efficacy of vaccines. The decision was left. In fact, it has left the government reeling after it admitted that it did not have the legal basis to order the culling of healthy mink. Fredrickson has faced opposition, calls to resign and a vote of no confidence in parliament. Denmark has proposed a ban on all mink breeding until the year 2022. Head of the Danish Mink Breeders Association said that the industry that employs 6,000 people and exports fur pelts worth $800 million is finished. Opposition leaders say the cull of healthy mink should not have been initiated before compensation plans were in place.
What's happened is, since then, and it's not very well covered, and I'm not going to cover it here, though there are videos, is that the Danish government has reneged on its insistence of killing 15 million mink because it doesn't actually have the legal authority to order healthy livestock to be killed. And there's been huge pushback, and we get that. Economic self-interest trumps healthcare in a pandemic over and over and over until the pandemic is bad enough that the few voices left that say, no, you can't kill my healthy mink and destroy my livelihood. I have all of these workers and we're dependent on this money. Very true. But if the mink gets infected and it becomes a serious different strain of the virus, if it becomes a super spreader, or if it becomes more infectious, or if it becomes more killing, or all three, which is entirely possible, then trying to keep the mink farmers' income going was a mistake. Now, they rushed this in and they didn't have any mechanism in place to help them financially, which also was a mistake, and they had no real plan to deal with 15 million mink, hence the bubbling mink coming out of the grounds in Denmark and contaminating the water supply. So of course the abuse and use of wild animals for domestic reasons is common in human history, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. What is probably wrong with it is industrialized processes on sentient creatures like mink and ducks and fish and everything else. Industrialized processes that have abnormal and cruel lives for the mink, and you can judge the videos you've seen for yourself. They're showing minks in wire cages. They can't swim, they can't run, they can't climb trees, they can't have natural lives, and they're very overcrowded. Hence, infections in those types of populations spread rapidly and can mutate quickly, which is why industrialized farming on the mega scale, including cows, is not something I would support under public health guidelines. We need to have small livestock farms in much more natural conditions, etc., which would mean a huge reduction in cheap meat and cheap fur. Now, meat's a different one, and I'm not going to get into the meat aspect of that, but I will point out to you there's quite easily available artificial petroleum-based methods of actually having fake fur to put on your boots. I often think when I see children out there wearing winter boots with the little fur balls on the end of them, I'm thinking, do you not know they're probably cats from China? So the issue for me as a vegan is that I don't support the killing of animals just because we can kill them and use them if there's alternatives available. So it turns out there's mink farming all over the world. You know, if you see little kids out there with fur on the boots or fur on their little collars because they have natural fur, because, you know, it's minus 40, you need natural fur. But for most of us, it's never that cold, and artificial fur would be just fine. It's decorative. So there's a huge industry that's very, very cruel to the animals and pointless. And the industrial scales of it means that infections can spread easily, they can alter, they can spread back to us, and we can get sicker. So everybody's very hypersensitive about SARS-CoV-2. It would be very weird if SARS-CoV-2 developed into SARS-CoV-3 this year. It would be very odd if it developed into it next year. but there is a potential, and that's what Fauci was meaning. So we have mink farming in Canada, and there's an outbreak in BC, and this report you're going to see actually shows you the conditions that the mink are kept in, which is actually kind of good conditions for captive mink, but I can't stand it. I think it's awful. That's just my personal stance.
COVID-19 stories that we're going to be watching today. Just got some breaking word on it overnight. The health officials in British Columbia have declared an outbreak at a mink farm in the Fraser Valley. Scientists have discovered that minks are susceptible to the virus. It transmutes and it can then carry over to humans. So it is a big concern, and Michael Serapio is here with this breaking detail. Michael.
Good morning, Heather, and you're right. This news did come to us from the Fraser Health Authority. It came through last night, local time in BC. And the Fraser Health Authority is the authority that has jurisdiction along the lower Fraser River, including parts of the Greater Vancouver Regional District. And that's important here because we don't actually have the name of this farm. It's not been shared by the local health authority. All we know is that it is located east of Vancouver. And an outbreak was declared after 8 people on this mink farm tested positive for COVID-19. As a result, all employees are being screened. Affected staff are self-isolating. Contact tracing is underway. Now, as you said, mink has been linked to COVID-19. And in Denmark, just last month, the government moved to kill roughly 15 million minks, both healthy and sick, after 11 people were diagnosed with a mutated version of the coronavirus. The World Health Organization saying that minks act as reservoirs for the virus that leads to the disease, passing COVID not only to other minks, but to humans as well. Now, the virus itself, of course, called SARS-CoV-2, that has also been detected in mink farms in the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, Italy, and the United States. But so far, an outbreak has only been declared on one mink farm. Again, one mink farm in the Fraser Valley. WorkSafe BC is now reaching out to the neighboring farms in the region to make sure that they have safety protocols in place to make sure this does not spread any further.
And the safety protocols they have in place, I understand, Michael, are different from the kinds of systems they have in place in European mink farms. So they've got a lot of things to watch, and obviously they're going to be tracking this situation very carefully and closely. But what happens to the mink?
Well, at this point, they are just staying on the farm, and that's because samples have been taken from the minks on this one farm. They're being sent to Winnipeg for diagnosis to see whether or not they actually do have the virus or even the disease. Again, it is 8 individuals on this farm. We don't know yet about the minks, so we are waiting for the blood work on that to come back from Winnipeg. Until those results are learned, the farm has been ordered to restrict the transport of animals to and from the farm, as well as any products or goods. Now, in Denmark's case, it got so bad that mink farming has been banned until 2022. That is why we're following the case very closely in British Columbia. But again, only one farm. We do not know yet if it's in the minks, and also very different protocols being followed in British Columbia versus what we're seeing in Europe.
At the time they didn't know. We knew from Denmark the mink can catch it from humans and humans can catch it from mink. You will see a subsequent report that shows that that has happened in BC because they actually use a vet. Again, it's interesting. Vets don't really have a background in public health. They do have, and the University of Guelph is world renowned, they do have a large background in infectious diseases spreading through captured populations and wild populations. So I would listen to what this lady is saying. She's a specialist in how infections spread in the wild and in agriculture.
An unidentified mink farm in BC is now under quarantine after animals and workers tested positive for COVID-19.
It seems it's just immoral to be making these animals suffer.
Those opposed to fur farms say the outbreak is another reason to bring an end to the practice. However, those in the industry say the single outbreak is a sign of care being taken. BC's chief veterinarian says the disease in the animals is mild and the quarantine order will prevent it from being transmitted off the farm. For more on this, I'm joined by Dorothy Beansley, professor of veterinary pathology at the University of Guelph. Good to see you, Dorothy. Thanks for your time this morning.
You're very welcome.
So, should we be alarmed by this news?
Yes, we should be alarmed. The disease spreads, or the infection spreads very easily in mink, and it's very hard to contain it within mink. And the virus can go back from mink to people. The mink likely got infected from people in the first place, very likely. But we know now from the experience in Denmark and other countries that the virus can also go back from mink into people, and that virus may be changed a little bit. So it is cause for concern.
So we all know the ability for viruses to transmit between humans and bats. Now we're learning mink. Why mink?
Well, as far as we can tell, mink are highly susceptible. The receptor that the virus uses, which is called the ACE2 receptor in mink, is particularly, it's very similar to the one in humans, and it's very adapted to binding the viral protein. It's the S protein in the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it interacts with that receptor in mink very well. And so they're very prone to being infected. We don't know where the receptor is expressed in mink, but it's likely expressed, same as in other species, throughout the nasal cavity and in the lungs and other organs.
Is it as debilitating to them as it is to some humans? I mean, some people do contract COVID-19, only have mild symptoms, some are asymptomatic. Is it the same for mink?
Yes, we've seen this in some outbreaks that have been studied quite well, and it seems to be in mink also similar, that a majority of animals get either no disease, no overt disease, or mild disease. A few get pneumonia and a few die. Now, we have to keep in mind that mink on farms are kept in very crowded conditions, and so the opportunity for transmission of the virus is much higher than it would be in the general human population.
I think one of the more alarming things that you've said is that the virus does mutate somewhat when it is transmitted to another species, as it were. So what does that mean? Does that mean if it were to escape that farm, would the virus be a different form of what we're familiar with now with COVID-19?
We don't know that for sure yet, but there is a possibility that the virus may be mutating. If the virus is replicating at a very high rate, which it would be if it is in a mink farm, which it likely would be because the mink are very crowded and there's probably a firestorm of infection going throughout the farm. So there is the opportunity for the virus to mutate at a relatively high rate, and that could convey in a new, slightly changed virus that is being transmitted back to humans.
And Dr. Beansley, does that mean the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer would not work on a mutated COVID-19?
We don't know that yet. I mean, it's a large protein, and even if a few of the proteins end up being changed, that may not impact the vaccine. So that's too early, and it's speculative at this point.
Right. Okay, I have 30 seconds left. What's the messaging then? They must contain this to that farm. What else can be done?
We must try very hard to contain it, and we need to also keep in mind our native wildlife that is in the mink family, such as wild mink, ferrets, etc., who would also be susceptible, highly susceptible.
Of course, the big report that sparked the interest in America is the fact that the infection is now in the wild mink population. Now, I will point out there's a huge amount of difference between capturing a few wild mink for specific reasons as a hunter-trapper without wiping out the population locally, which most hunter-trappers would not be wanting to do, and industrial farming of mink for fur. There's a huge difference for me, both morally, ethically, and from a health point of view.
The first known case of coronavirus in a wild animal in the U.S. has been reported in Utah, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The USDA has been carrying out screening of species around mink farms in Utah, Michigan, and Wisconsin for several months to determine if COVID-19 has spread to nearby wildlife. Officials said that a wild mink in Utah found near one of the affected farms tested positive for a strain of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus identical to that found in the captive animals. The USDA wrote that they have found nothing to indicate further spread among wildlife.
So as ever, as a prepper, there's two ways of dealing with things. Well, three. You can just ignore it and hope for the best, or you can just accept the risk, or you can actually take actions on an individual level to mitigate the risk if you can't remove it. And in terms of mass agriculture and putting masses of mammals together in wire cages or tiny little pens, if you can, try to source your meat, your fish, your birds, your fur from different sources that might be better. Like if you know somebody who's got a homestead and you see that they have chickens and they're not selling eggs, maybe knock on their door carefully if you're in America and see if you can buy some. They'll probably cost you a little bit more, but they will be far tastier. And in fact, with eggs, they're probably cheaper than store-bought, and they certainly will be fresher. And in fact, you could even talk to them about chicken. A large number of small homesteads have fowl, male chickens, and they actually are not very well sold in North America because North Americans find the meat too gamey. However, if you hang it properly and you use proper sauces, male chicken meat is actually okay. Now I feel a bit funny saying this because I'm a vegan, but I haven't always been a vegan. I've only been a vegan for about 8 years. And I do think it's important that we are normalized in our behaviour. Like for me, I would just ban it all. But you can't just ban it all, because then people lose their livelihoods, and a large number of people enjoy and want to eat meat and want to have mink fur on their clothing. You might be able to justify eating meat. You can't justify wearing fur. And you can justify it if you live and work in areas that are -40, because artificial plastic, petrochemical boots and clothing tends to fail when it's extreme cold. Now the world's heating up, so that's not really a concern for almost all of us. So have a think about it. If you want to get a Canada Goose coat filled with down, feathers, don't. Get a woolly coat, about the same price, and there's no cruelty involved. And critically, you're not encouraging animals and birds to be congregated together for large periods of times in pretty horrible conditions, and therefore creating a reservoir of infection spread. I'm very concerned about the feedlots in the United States in the spring. I'm really concerned specifically about pigs, and I'm concerned that we will get infections going into those populations. A lot of people blame China for COVID-19. Yeah, it probably originated in China because there's large numbers of people pushing into normal biosphere, into the natural wild, and congregating animals together in filthy conditions in close contact with human beings. You can easily change things around without making everybody go vegan or you shoot them to make things like that less likely, far less likely. And the only way you can really do that is by public pressure, not buying products that are inhumane or cruelly treated or cruelly raised. That works. And you have to be very careful. As I use the example of Canada Goose, the cost of it is not an indicator of the decency of the product. Well, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm personally not particularly worried about COVID-19 being in the wild population. A lot of people are saying things like, if it's in the wild population, that means we'll never get rid of it. Yeah, the chances are, like the common cold, we're never actually going to get rid of SARS-CoV-2 unless we have a 90 to 95% efficient vaccine that pretty much the entire world takes within a 6 months to a year period, and then keeps being revaccinated as people are born. There's a lot of things about the vaccine that may or may not function, but it is our only best hope at the moment. So that's all from me. Please give me a subscription if you like this type of video. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this type of video. Please feel free to share the videos if you want to. If you don't like the video, please give me a thumbs down and unsubscribe me. If you want to make comments in the comment section, please do. I do endeavour to try and comment back to everybody, and I think it's really important that we have a dialogue. Remember, killing mink, housing mink for fur, is an emotive subject for some people. So be a little bit decent in the comments. If somebody's very strident and aggressive either about doing it or not doing it, the truth is almost always going to be in between, and if you could actually get them to listen to each other, they probably have large areas of mutual agreement. Peace, toodles. This was a brand new Terry production 2020.